Child sexual abuse, the process of disconnection and healing process in Philippine context. For our learning outcomes, first, to understand the nature of child sexual abuse, and next is to describe the psychological effect of sexual abuse on children. Third, explore approaches in managing child sexual abuse, and fourth, to understand the process of disconnection and healing process in Philippine context. Managing children who were victims of sexual abuse is a complex and fragile process. It is very delicate. It's very sophisticated. It's not easy. Kaya importante na magkaroon ng mas malawakan, very holistic training ang isang psychologist na mag-manage ng sexual abuse, ng trauma from sexual abuse. So, hindi ibig sabihin na psychologist ka, kaya mo na. So, you needed an extra training for this. Why do you need an extra training? Kasi kapag nagkamali ka, baka makadagdag ka sa sakit na naranasan ng isang bata. So when does sexual abuse of child happen? Nangyayari ang iba-ibang klase ng pang-aabuso sa tahanan, sa loob ng pamilya, sa kapitbahay, sa bahay ng kaibigan, sa paaralan, sa school, sa playground, sa community, sa simbahan, or any church gatherings or whatever, and sa internet. So, kung titingnan natin sa iba't ibang bahagi ng ating paligid, ay maaaring maabuso ang isang bata. That is why we have to be very, very careful about sa mga tao na pinagkakatiwalaan natin. How does a child manifest abuso? Paano minamanifest ng bata ang karanasan ng pag-abuso, sexual abuse sa kanya? Self-report. Kung merong kamalayan ng bata, awareness ng bata about sexual abuse, makakapagpahayag, pwedeng i-report ito ng bata. Kung meron siyang confidence, kung na-train siya, kapag may nangyaring ganun, kinakailangan mong sabihin. Kung may mga bata na na-train para magsabi o magsumbong na nangyari ang sexual abuse sa kanya. Second, physical sign and medical examination. Mga bruises, mga galos, mga sugat. And to validate that, we have to send the child for medical checkup to validate whether the child was sexual abused or not. Third, nagkakaroon ng strong interest and curiosity on sexual issues. Kasi nga nagkaroon ng karanasan. So merong awakening na nangyayari sa kamalayan ng bata, sa kaisipan ng bata about sex. Sexual behavior. Ang example ng sexual behavior ay paglalaro sa genitals. Alright? And 5, remembering the abuse. So whether we like it or not, there is a memory. The experience of abuse, of sexual abuse, is stored in the memory of the child, the brain and sensory. Nightmares. Sa pagtulog ng bata ay nagsusurface yung karanasan, lalo kapag merong aggression na nangyari, merong pananakit na nangyari while having the sexual abuse. Okay? It's possible na mag-surface ang mga nightmares. Okay? Dissociation, hallucination, and delusions. O pagkawala ng bata sa kanyang sarili. Okay? Anger and rage. The next is emotional disturbance, depression, anxiety, irritability. It's just like a roller coaster. So iba-ibang pwedeng mangyari na emosyon sa bata. Regressive behaviors. Ang example ng regression ay pagtatamsaking. Okay? And the next is the fearfulness and distrust. Takot, matinding takot, at kawalan ng tiwala sa mga tao na kapaligid sa kanya. Guilt and shame. Pagkahiya sa sarili. Much more kapag meron ng awareness ang bata na mali ang nangyari sa kanya. So nagkakaroon ngayon ng hiya, ng pagsisisi sa kanyang sarili kung bakit nangyari yon. And the third is social withdrawal, isolation. Pag-alis ng bata, pagtatago ng bata. Family disconnection. Specifically when the abuse happened inside their homes, inside the house. Okay? And a significant family member is the perpetrator of the abuse. Okay? At pwede rin kasi mangyari na pwedeng sisihin ng bata, miskin sa labas nangyari, sa kapitbahay, pwedeng ibaling ng bata ang sisi kung bakit hindi siya naprotektuhan. That is if there is an awareness already on the part of a child. Okay? In terms of the violation of himself or herself brought by the sexual abuse. And last is this low self-esteem, kawalan ng pagtitiwala, kawalan ng, for example, respeto sa sarili. Okay. The process of disconnection, there's so many things disconnected. This can happen totally. Everything is happening here. This could be a physical disconnection, emotional disconnection, social disconnection, cognitive disconnection, communication disconnection, environmental disconnection, and a spiritual disconnection. All right. So when we go back to this one, this basically this one summarizes all this manifestation. All right. Later on, I will be giving you example, just for example, on how a person can be physically disconnected after the sexual abuse. The dynamics of victims within a specific developmental age. I have been mentioning in a while ago that within developmental age, kapag nangyari ang sexual abuse, maaring walang awareness ang bata sa nangyayari sa kanya. At pwede rin within a specific age, just for example, nangyari 7 years old, 8 years old, 9 or 10, 11. So meron ng kamalayan ang bata. So iba ang dynamic na wala kang alam sa nangyayari at iba rin ang dynamics na alam mo na merong what they call this, hindi karapat-rapat na mangyari sa'yo. And that is sexual abuse. The dynamics of victims within a specific environment, family, and socio-cultural background. Merong, just for example, may ibang kultura. Just for example, when you're talking about women, so women are considered lower than men. So when you're talking about sexual abuse, hindi nila masyadong nare-recognize that just to serve the interest of the male sector. So meron ding pamilya that just for example, just to protect the dignity of the family, they do not want the issue of sexual abuse to be brought out. No? Alright, so itong mga ganitong klaseng dynamics ay nakakaapekto sa naabuso na bata. The impact of sexual abuse on children may vary from case to case. So, wala tayong specific menu na pwedeng ibigay na kapag sexual abuse, ito yung gagawin mo. So, importante na maintindihan natin yung buong sistema, buong dynamics na nangyayari sa individual na bata. It has to be a case-to-case basis. So, hindi ka pwedeng mag-generalize na kapag nagkaroon ng sexual abuse, ito yung magiging response mo. Ito yung pagkaunawa mo. It doesn't work that way. That is why from the very start, I said it is a very complicated, it's a very sophisticated process when you're dealing with the trauma of a child coming from sexual abuse. The dynamics of a child within varied forms of abuse. So, iba-iba ang forma ng sexual abuse. Okay? So, these are more or less the list of the kind of sexual abuse a child may encounter. Consummated sexual act with one or many adults. So, ang sexual act ng isang adult against a child ay maaring isang adult lang o maaring 2 o 3 adults na nang-abuso sa kanya. So, given the 1 adult and given the 3 adults, that's a different dynamic, right? So, given 1 adult male, 1 adult female, that is a different dynamics. Or 2 males, that is a different dynamics. So, the next one is the force or entire sexual act with other children. Parang tawag dito, inakit ang isang bata. Parang manipulate ang isang bata to get into a specific sexual experience. Pag touch na different parts of the body na walang let's say, walang penetration na nangyari. Hindi consummated yung sexual act. So, paghawak lamang sa different parts of the body. Pag-seduced. Alright? Paggamit ng object, okay, sa katawan ng bata. Or showing sexual explicit materials, kagaya ng pornography. Okay? Watching adult performing sexual act. Pwedeng hindi mo ginagalaw ang bata, pero inilagay mo ang bata sa isang sitwasyon na kailangan panoorin ng isang bata, ang dalawang adults na gumagawa ng isang sexual act. Pwede rin na merong physical assault na kasama, aside from those things that I mentioned. Pwede rin may kasamang verbal abuse o meron kasama rin ang pananakot. So, hinahawakan kita, yung katawan ng bata, pero at the same time, may pananakot mo ito sasabihin, papatayin kita, papatayin ko yung buong pamilya mo. Right? Pag sinabi mo ito, papatayin ko yung nanay mo, papatayin ko yung mga kapatid mo. Right? So, the next one is the cybersex. So, ito yung isa sa mga development ng sexual abuse sa mga bata na ginagamit mo ang mga bata for pornography. Kukunan mo sila ng video at ibebenta mo ito online. At the next is the repeated abuse. So, hindi lang isang beses nangyari, 2 beses nangyari, 3 beses, paulit-ulit na nangyari. For example, 1 year na nangyari, 2 years na nangyari. So, that is a different story. Okay, that is a different dynamics. And the last one is the mixed form of abuse. So, pwedeng yung nasabi ko a while ago, pagsama-samahin yun, ay pwedeng nangyayari yun sa isang bata. O pwedeng, o dalawa, o pwedeng sinudus lang, o merong threat. Okay? But the worst part is kapag is a combination of all these varied forms of abuse. And the next one is the impact of male abuser to a female child. Ano ang impact ng male abuser sa isang babae na bata? Okay? Now, it's also different dynamics and the impact of female abuser to female child. So, isang babae ang nag-abuso sa babaeng bata. And the impact of male abuser to a male child. And the next is the impact of female abuser to male child. So, dito pa lang sa aspeto na we're talking about gender differences. Iba yung impact sa isang bata when you're talking about the gender of the abuser. So pwede rin yung impact ng dalawang abuser, male and female. Now, let me present few cases that I've handled before. The case one is Fatima, para lang mas maintindihan natin yung dynamics ng sexual abuse. And a while ago, I have been talking about different kind of disconnection, the physical disconnection, the social disconnection, the cognitive disconnection, and so on and so forth. Now, let's look into the case one, Fatima. Fatima was referred to me by one teacher. Okay. So I've trained because I have been training pre-service and in-service teachers when I was teaching in the College of Education, teaching educational psychology. So I've been training my students before na when you're using psychological process and you would like to understand better the children, so these are the things that you needed to pay attention to. May mga pagkakataon na magmamanifest ang mga bata ng mga nangyayari sa kanila, lalo tigit ang mga pang-abuso. So meron silang mga non-verbal cues na ibabato sa atin para maintindihan mo na merong nangyayari sa akin. So my case one is Fatima. So again, this was referred to me by a teacher. So sabi sa akin, teacher, pakitingnan mo nga itong estudyante na ito. Kasi in the first 2 months at the start of the class, okay naman siya. She was very engaging, she was very participative, and she was very friendly to other students. And sumusunod naman sila sa mga activities ng klase. And in short, but Fatima, age 8, is a normal, typical students. But all of a sudden, isang araw ay pumasok na lang siya na parang wala sa sarili. At ang ginawa niya ay pumunta siya doon sa wall. Hinila niya muna yung silya niya at pumunta sa wall at umarap lang sa wall at na parang tulala. So, kung makikita niyo sa picture, yan mismo yan. So, hindi lang isang beses ito nangyari. So, the observation happened for a week. Kaya na-alarm na yung teacher, kaya kinontak ako. And sinabihan ako, can you look into this? Alright. So, yan na yung naging behavior ng bata after 2 months na normal naman siya, okay naman siya. But not only that. Okay? So, may mga still working on the same case. So, si Fatima is, while working with other students, will be doing something else. So merong mga unusual behavior si Fatima na basically very much different from what other students are doing. So, for example, dito sa picture na ito, merong activity, they might be working on a workbook. But here is Fatima, sa pinakadulo na yan, meron siyang clay na hinihiwa ng kutsilyo. Okay, sa black clay, yun lang ginagawa niya. Paulit-ulit niya ginagawa yan. So this kind of behavior has been happening again consistently for 2 weeks until the time that I was informed of the situation. Other than that, all right, Fatima, sa lahat ng libro ni Fatima, lahat ng books niya, lahat ng tao doon sa libro ni Fatima, ito yung ginagawa niya. Pinubutasan niya yung mata at saka dinadarken ng shade ang lahat ng mata ng bata. At merong dark shade din yung bibig ng mga human figures sa lahat ng libro ni Fatima. And I told the teacher, okay, so keep on exploring and keep feeding me on, giving me feedback on the situation of Fatima. And Fatima would one time drew something like this. Meron siyang dinro na parang cage na parang na may lion sa loob ng cage. Tapos sabi ko sa teacher, bring back the drawing to Fatima and ask Fatima to talk about the what you call this, of the drawing. So sabi ni Fatima, there's a lion inside the cage, hindi siya dapat makawala. So ang isa pa is, galit ako sa lion, hindi siya dapat makalabas sa cage na yan. So I have managed different cases of children who suffered sexual abuse, who were victims of sexual abuse. I always have a kind of feeling, kapag kasi ang dami-dami mo ng karanasan sa pag-manage, sa pakikinig naman itong klaseng cases, meron ka ng hunch, parang may nangyari na hindi maganda sa batang ito. Alright. So, later on, pursuing the case, talking about the child, eventually we discovered that, right, that the child was sexually abused. So when there was already a manifestation from the behavior of the child and from the outputs of the child, all right. So eventually we asked the parents to bring the child to a doctor to have a physical checkup, specifically instructing them to check if the child was sexual abused. So eventually, unfortunately and very sadly, so the physical examination had validated that Fatima was abused. unfortunately, by a family member. Okay, so we try to pursue the case, but in that culture, um, not the culture happening not only in the society but the culture happening in the school. But all of a sudden, the case dropped. Parang nawala na lang yung kaso dahil it's like the family would prefer to be silent about it. But at the same time, also the school um, would not want to meddle with the case. Parang ayaw nilang makailam doon sa kaso. It's like parang it would become a very chaotic situation for the school. And that's a very unfortunate situation for the child. So it's like this we can only do so much. Okay, especially for me, who's an outsider in the school, outsider in the family, we can only do so much. But to instruct the teacher what she can probably do to to work on the child. So given this case, so makikita ninyo na ang pang-aabuso ay pwede magkaroon ng abrupt impact sa tawag ito, sa consciousness, sa kamalayan ng bata, sa behavior ng bata, sa communication process ng bata. So makikita niyo naman sa picture, bigla na lang nagbago from being engaging child towards being isolated child. Right? So, ang sexual abuse ay pwedeng abrupt na magbago doon sa dating normal na ginagawa ng bata. Case 2. Joy was sexually abused by not by a family member but a significant person known to the family. All right. So again, Joy was sexually abused by at the age of 9. So at first, nobody knew about what happened to Joy. So Joy was presented to me as a case of a counseling for a child na pasaway, matigas ang ulo, hindi umuwi ng bahay. So that behavior of a child was presented to me when she was already about 13 years old. So, na-meet ko si Joy 13 years old, but the abuse happened 9. So, inilapit sa akin ang case ni Joy dahil hindi nila maintindihan si Joy. Parang she's like a juvenile delinquent, so on and so forth. I dealt with Joy, but to cut the story short, as along the way, as was working on the story, okay, I discovered that Joy was sexually abused. So the thing is that parang nag-rebelde si Joy. Okay, parang she felt she was not protected. She felt the family did not care for her. She felt what do you call this? She's basically isolated. The family does not bother at all. So ang family naman parang it's like aware ang family na kung ano ginagawa ni Joy, naninigarilyo, nakikipagbarkada, nakikipagrelasyon. Parang she's considered as a black sheep of the family. So when I got to the family and revealed what happened to Joy, now they begin to realize that from the very start they were so wrong about their judgment about Joy. Na yung lahat ng behavior ni Joy ay naglilid doon sa karanasan ng pag-aabuso sa kanya. So there was so many disconnection, so social disconnection that happened. This is a communication disconnection, there's a spiritual disconnection. So nawala ng pagtitiwala sa sarili, nawala ng respeto sa sarili. At the same time, there's also a cognitive disconnection dahil marami ng confusion na nangyari sa pagkaintindi sa kanyang sarili. So nandun yung karanasan from age 9, pero Walang nagpapaliwanag, walang nakakaintindi at walang nakakaalam, walang nakaka-discover kung ano yung nangyari. So this is a situation of a child who had this sexual abuse pero at aware siya na merong abuso na nangyari sa kanya pero wala siyang mapanghawakan. So it was just a parang it just, let's say this is a blessing that I was able to, that they contacted me. I was able to talk to Joy. So haba-habang proseso na counseling with the family. So the healing of the family, the bring together of the family, but at the same time putting the perpetrator to jail. So pinursu yung kaso. But at the same time, the healing process of the child takes slowly. Okay, the building of the trust, the building of a relationship. At the same time, building the life of Joy. So it was. I would say this for me was a success story because on my part, because I was able to follow through the development of Joy, following. She's now at this point now she's a very successful in terms of her career. She's married already. Um, she has her own children already, and basically she was able to recover from that event, from that harrowing event of her life. Case three. Um, my case is about Gabriel. Gabriel is um, I I had the chance to an opportunity to know Gabriel when he was already 27 years old. But um, Gabriel was abused at the age of 8. Gabriel was an encounter because of my work. So was just an encounter that led Gabriel to open up. So he attended one of my sessions before on psychology, and that gave him the confidence, the um, the parang ng lakas na loob na lapitan ako para sabihin ko ano yung nangyayari sa kanya. So initially, Gabriel talked about his lack of self-confidence, kawalan ng tiwala sa sarili. But I saw him to be a very smart guy, very articulate, um, may potential. Pero ang nasabi niya parang wala siyang tiwala sa sarili, hindi ko alam kung ano ang direction ko at the age of 27. Then, um, my encounter with him, my professional encounter with him started with that conversation. Me as a psychologist and him as my client that who needed help. So so going through the story of Gabriel, working on this self-esteem, self-confidence, and the like, then um, I was able to let surface the most difficult part of his life, and I was able to talk about the abuse that happened. And this one again, there's a family member. So at the age of 8, from that time on, as he uh, went through his life, at the age of 8, doon after how many years, at the age of 27, doon pa lang siya nakapagsabi kung ano nangyari sa kanya. At sa akin niya nasabi yan, that he was abused by an uncle at the age of 8. Then he graphically told me the entire thing that happened. So it's a combination of many aspects that I mentioned a while ago, different forms of abuse. Okay, by a male a uh, to a male child. But it doesn't end there. Eventually, he told me another thing. This is more of a severe psychological concern. Ito yung naging habit niya, and this started when he was, I think, in his teenage years. He created a habit of peeling off, scratching different parts of the body. And not only that, he started peeling off skin, different parts of the body. Kaya pa napansin ko, iba-ibang bahagi ng katawan niya, parang may mga sugat. Alright? Not only that, peeling off the skin from different parts of the body and also on the head also. And he does not feel the pain kapag siya ay nagpipeel off ng skin. And in contrary, nagkakaroon pa ng pleasure yung kanyang pagpipeel off ng skin at kinakain niya yung skin na yun. And it has become a habit for him, especially kapag nalulungkot siya, nababalikan niya yung karanasan na nangyari sa kanya. And he feels so ashamed. He's totally lost about who he is as a person. And he is even so confused about his gender identity, okay, or sexual orientation. Okay, so on the other hand also, Gabriel was, even prior to my meeting him, was already taking antidepressants. He's antipsychosis also. He's taking medicines because he was already seeing psychiatrists before I met him. So from then on, have been working on him. All right. So I had successful story about, stopping the behavior of peeling off the skin. Okay. It took a while for him to get over that specific behavior. So I am bringing this case just to for you to understand what could be the heavy, parang a grave impact of sexual abuse on a child, and how this can be impacting a child kapag hindi siya na-address, okay, hindi siya na-address ng maayos. So maaring napakaraming disconnection na mangyayari. So it's basically a physical disconnection, just uncontrollable physical behavior, the peeling of the skin, and the communication process, even the spiritual aspect of the aspect of beliefs on oneself. So this case is a classic example of a sexual abuse where it disconnects the person piece by piece, and it was carried over to adult life. Right. Case 4 is John. All right, 9 years old. John was sexually abused by a neighbor. John was basically not aware of the sexual abuse. And according to John, he developed a kind of pleasurable experience of the sexual abuse of a male towards him. So there was no aggression, but there was a memory of pleasure that happened to him. So I met John also in his adult life already. So the impact of pleasure of that sexual abuse to John was that he was sexually addicted, to the extent that he kind of prostituted himself. He parang tawag dito, binibenta, it's not even binibenta, parang ibinibigay niya ang kanyang sarili kung sino man. Okay, pero pag nagkakaroon ng stimulation that he wanted to kind of have sexual encounter, he would easily give into it. So in short, John became kind of sexually addicted to any sexual experience. So again, this is one of my success stories also about managing an adult to experience sexual abuse. But again, it took a while for me to work on John. So again, this case points out to an impact of sexual abuse. So hindi ibig sabihin, for example, in sexual abuse parang aggression mangyayari, mawawala sa sarili. But in the case of John, there is a pleasure that happened in sexual abuse, and this actually led to sexual addiction. Again, children will manifest directly and indirectly the experience of sexual abuse. Pwede lang direktang sabihin, pwede lang directly manifest, but there are non-verbal cues na kung saan ipapahayag ng bata na nagkaroon ng sexual abuse. So what are the basics of managing sexual abuse? In a regular setting, usually, just for example, if you have contact with the social workers, usually naman kasi kapag merong issue of sexual abuse in the Philippines, usually kapag government agencies ang nag-handle dito, at a certain point, sila yung magko-connect sa mga psychologists para mag-manage ng case, ng mga case nila. So given that scenario, na nasa poder na nila, for example, nasa center na nila yung bata at sila yung nangangalaga na doon sa bata na the mga bata who were victims of sexual abuse. So, ikokontak ka nila just to work on the case. Alright? So, ano yung mga basic na mapamamaraan ng pag-manage ng sexual abuse? So, the first is to work on the current information about a child's demography, narratives of the sexual abuse from the social worker, and the services provided. So, again, importante na malaman kung ano yung mga nangyari. Kasi, yung demography na yon, yung mga data na yon, ang bibigay sa iyo ng clue kung anong klaseng proseso ang gagamitin. A while ago, I mentioned about the different dynamics of the child, kung sino mga naabuso, ano yung mga nangyari. Kasi, ito rin ang gagamitin mo para to explore mga possibility na mga therapy or activity na pwedeng gawin para sa bata. So the second one is to be gentle in exploring opportunities for connection. Okay, so hindi mo pwedeng puwersahin isang bata na ito na ang gawin. So you really have to slowly but surely trying to open opportunities, open doors, open windows in the child's consciousness, in the child's well-being, in the child's self, para makita mo, dito ako pwedeng pumasok. Right? Ito yung pwede kong tingnan. Pwede akong mag-build up ng opportunity for connection. So, hindi ganun kadali mag-establish ng connection sa isang bata. So, hindi yung parang pag nandoon ka na, para magbibigay agad ng activity. So, you really have to re-understand the situation. And the next one is the building trusts. Okay? Dahil tiwala yung nasira. So, importante na mag-build ng pagtitiwala na pwede kang pagkatiwalaan ng bata. So, there are times na kinakailangan mong gawing activity na maraming tao sa paligid. O pwede rin depende again sa situation na pwede kang gawa ng activity na kayo lang at ng bata. Alright. Then, you will have to be able to identify activities. So, may mga activity na you have to be very, very sensitive sa pagpili ng mga activity. Kasi there will be time baka yung mga activity na ginagawa mo could trigger memories doon sa bata. Kaya nga, importante na alamin kung ano yung demography, ano yung data. Okay? Baka mamaya gumagawa ka ng mga activity na mag-stimulate ng memories ng bata, ng sexual abuse. And while doing activity, this is also important, for example, as a clinical psychologist, to take notes. Kasi there might be time na baka malimutan yung importante na information na makakatulong para sa recovery ng bata. So, discreetly. So na parang pasimple ka lang na mag-note ka. Okay? Or immediately after the session, after meeting the child, then immediately take your notes. Okay? So, you need to validate observations from the caregiver and social worker. So if you're dealing with a certain center or dealing with children with sexual abuse, so importante na ma-validate mo na ito yung na-obserbahan mo doon sa mga caregiver para magkaroon ng pagkakatugma-tugma yung mga observation. Alright, so tatanungin mo yung caregiver, ito yung napapansin ko sa bata na ito, tatanungin yung social worker, ito yung napapansin ko sa mga bata na ito, para makagawa ka ng mas klarong plano kung ano yung pwedeng gawin sa bata. Then, the next one is develop holistic plans. So, importante na meron kang integral plan sa bata, and a very practical plan. For example, you're working in a center, hindi ka naman stay in doon sa institution na yon o sa center na yon. So, importante na makagawa ka ng plano na practical na makakatulong sa bata. And last but not the least is to write the progressive reports. When you talk about progressive reports, you're not only writing about a psychological report or the issue of the sexual abuse, but you're working on the progress of the child. So importante ang progressive report para na follow up ang dapat na i-follow up doon sa tawag dito para matulungan ng ang bata na mas maayos. Managing sexual abuse. When you're talking about sexual abuse, managing sexual abuse, you're creating connections again, right? First, you're creating a physical connection, the emotional connection, social connection, cognitive connection, communication connection, ecological connection, and spiritual connection. Just for example, we're talking about physical connection, doing exercises, hygiene. So I'm talking here about children who is being taken care of by center, or is possible also by the family, right? And the next one is the creating of the emotional connection, being able to express, right? And the social connection is being able to identify a concrete social support. It could be kaibigan, it could be the family, or it could be anybody in the center. Kasi importante kapag when you're talking about sexual abuse, na merong pagkakapitan ng bata, na merong magpoprotect sa kanya, at merong magpapahalaga sa kanya. Is the cognitive connection is very important to look into the thought process of the child, not necessarily about talking about the sexual abuse, but it's about looking into the thought process. Ano yung flow ng pag-iisip ng bata. Okay? And communication connection. When you look at the child being able to communicate, being able to express, being able to to talk about things, right? And the next one is ecological connection. Is we make sure that the child is safe. So the place, the center or the home is a place where the child will feel safe again. Okay, so ang pag-develop ng environment ng bata that is why when you for example when you're developing a center, importante na yung center mo ay nagbi-build nag-exude ng isang very positive environment that is very different from the kind of environment that he had or that she had during the sexual abuse. All right. Just for example, an example of ecological connection. Kung ang bata ay naabuso sa isang lugar at ang lugar na yon ay aware sa nangyari na sexual na pang-abuso sa bata, do you think is it still healthy na dalhin mo ulit ang bata na yon sa komunidad na yon? Just for example, lalo kapag ang komunidad na yon ay mahilig sa pagchichismis, sa pagmamarites, at lalaki ang bata na sabihin, oy, di ba ikaw yung na sexual abuse? So definitely you have to bring the child out of that community. Alisin mo ang bata na yon doon sa komunidad na yon. Because that child will definitely be destroyed again para sa recreation of another abuse to a child. And the last one is against the spiritual connection. So you're creating, you are building again the child's self-confidence. You're rebuilding child's belief on oneself. Muling pagrespeto, pagpapakilala ng pagkakaroon ng bagong simula, bagong buhay sa isang bata. Not necessarily about belief in God, but in the context of the Philippines, that might help. But again, that's something to explore. Now, this is still very much similar to this one, okay? So when you are trying to develop child's strengths and develop programs, so focus on the strengths, and you basically work on this structure. You work on the strength of a child in view of the physical wellness, emotional wellness, social wellness, cognitive wellness, communication, environmental, and spiritual. So if you're developing a program, this is a very practical structure para lang mas makita mo ng klaro kung saan nagde-develop ang isang bata. Dealing with sexual abuse is a developmental and lifetime healing process. Hindi ibig sabihin na na-counseling mo na siya na one time, iyon na yun. So, kagaya ng mga cases na na-share ko a while ago, it's a lifetime process. At depende yun sa klase ng karanasan na nangyari sa bata. So, kung very aggressive yung sexual abuse, merong pananakot, andun lahat ang traumatic experience ng bata. Do you think sa isang buwan, 2 buwan, mawawala na yon? Not at all. Not at all. Kaya importante na merong sustainable na proseso na mangyayari sa pagtulong sa bata. Kaya hindi lang ito one-time shot deal na psychological service. It is a lifetime process. I'm not just fully aware. I'm only but aware of the cases that I was able to follow up. But when you're talking about, I'm not just so sure, but in terms of the cases of the institutions that I have helped before, walang tawag dito, wala silang long-term na programa. Parang it's just a short-term program na the children will be staying, will be protected for a while, then eventually the children will be released and brought back to the parents. So yung mga services na binibigay pang short term na. But again, looking at the dynamics of trauma, looking at the dynamics of sexual abuse and its impact on children, it could take a lifetime of healing. Protection of a child. The protection of a child may prevention is better than cure. So just for example, it's the same thing with the protection of a child. Just to prevent sexual abuse on children. So it's very important the education of parents, the education of the relatives, education of the caregivers in community. Kasi lalo na, just for example, pinagkakatiwala mo ang isang bata sa isang caregiver, tapos walang ganong klaseng awareness, o pinagkakatiwala mo ang isang bata sa isang kamag-anak. Kasi isang minuto na abuse lang yan, 2 minuto na abuse, but the abuse can take a lifetime of impact on a child. So again, it is very important to educate the parents, caregivers, and community about sexual abuse and how to take care of children against sexual abuse. And also, it's very important to educate the children. So kapag sa palagay mo na aware na ang bata to understand, meron na siyang kakayahan na maintindihan, we have to make children aware about on how to protect themselves. So, hindi pwede mangyari ito. Children could be made aware na kapag nangyari ito, this certain act could be considered sexual abuse already. So, the children have to be aware. And the next one is to develop programs in schools and communities. Again, it's the education of the society about sexual abuse. When the society is educated and the specific program, let's say in the community, merong, for example, isang center doon that makes people aware about sexual abuse, then the rest of the community will be will have a stronger awareness of protecting children against sexual abuse. But the thing is, I don't think here in the Philippines we have a very strong awareness about, specifically when talking about communities, a strong awareness of the communities taking care of children against sexual abuse. So what are the knowledge, as a psychologist, what are the knowledge and skills you need to manage sexual abuse? So you need to understand child development, the basics of child development. The second is the counseling children. Counseling children. So it's different when you're counseling adults compared to counseling children. Because there's again different dynamics of children in terms of approaching them, of dealing with them, listening to them, and allowing them to express themselves. And with the family counseling, especially when you're talking about the dynamics of family supporting a child who was sexually abused. So you needed a kind of background. If you really want to have a child, so you needed to bring together the family in terms of the healing process, understanding the situation, and strengthening, of course, family relationship. And the next is the creative therapies for children. Later on, I will be talking about this. So it's important when you're dealing with children, you do not only do the counseling, okay? So you needed to be creative in different processes of psychotherapy for children. And the next is educating the family. So you needed to know how to educate the family in terms of sexual abuse. And the next one is um, the process of building trusts, specifically with children. And the next one is set boundaries. You should know how to set your boundaries. Your boundaries as psychologists and between you and the client. We do not have to be too attached to the situation. All right, we have to be very very professional, and we have to draw the a clear line to set boundaries between you and your clients, the children. And the next one is the psychological assessment for children, specifically the projective techniques. I find projective techniques very, very useful in detecting sexual abuse. So, drawing therapy, in terms of my experience with children who were sexually abused, drawing therapy is quite useful for me. Drama therapy is also very useful because it also serves as a catharsis for children of being able to express, getting out of themselves, at the same time targeting a specific skills, specific strengths that they need to develop. Narrative therapy, children being able to tell their stories, so this is very very useful also. Um, and the play therapy. The play therapy, I'm going to go back to that slide. The play therapy is also very useful. And children can be very, very engaging also with play therapy. Puppet therapy. Puppet therapy is very enjoying for children. But at the same time, this is not only therapeutic, but at the same time, children will be able to tell the story. And you can work on the different aspect of wellness here, specifically of communication. And the next one is the family therapy, specifically in strengthening interpersonal relationship, concretizing family support system, recognize areas of concerns, educating parents, and monitoring child's progress, and identifying strengths. Not only the strength of a child, but identifying the strengths of a family in support of their child. Okay. Going back to the healing of a child, it takes a while. Again, it depends from case to case. It all depends on the availability of resources and support system. Okay, so at the end of everything, it's not only about you. Okay, pagkakatandaan niyo ito, you can only work so much on yourself as a psychologist. But if you really want to really help the child, it's to be a systemic. Hindi lang ikaw, pero the family, for example, the center. Pero kapag hindi na nakikipag-cooperate ang family o hindi nakikipag-cooperate ang center, okay, this you can only do so much. And sometimes it can be very very frustrating dahil marami pang gustong gawin. But you know, again, this you will find your own limitations when you are in the real situation. And again, it all depends on the compassionate care of people, especially the parents and caregivers. So there are situations that parents may not be caring at all. Some people, significant people around that child might not be that hindi nagbibigay ng buong buo para magkaroon ng recovery yung bata. Alright. Okay, when you're talking about unmanaged trauma, kapag hindi na ma-manage ang trauma, um, sexual trauma, again, going back, there could be an extreme physical disconnection, emotional disconnection, social disconnection, cognitive disconnection, communication disconnection, environmental disconnection, and spiritual disconnection. And I have explained that very well on the 4 cases. And the impact of childhood sexual abuse to adult life, again, is the same thing. It can vary from person to person. But again, these are the things that you have to consider. This is structure. So you can look at the physical disconnection, the emotional disconnection, social disconnection, the cognitive disconnection, the communication disconnection, the environmental disconnection, and spiritual disconnection. Now, going into the ethical practice. So first, we always have to consider the best interest of a child. Okay? Remember, it is the best interest of a child. Nakikipag-engage tayo sa isang bata na na-abuse sexually because we would like to work on the best interest of a child. And the second one is we make sure that the child is protected, right? That even before we get into the counseling, that the child is protected. If the abuse is happened inside their home, inside their family, by a family, let's say family member, we make sure that the child is protected, that is outside that specific environment where the sexual abuse happened. And the next one is to recognize child at risk. Importante na ma-recognize ang bata ay may kakaya ng sakta ng sarili, may kakaya ng, let's say, to commit suicide or hurt other people or hurt other children. So we have to recognize that also. And then the next one is the aspect of confidentiality. So hindi natin pwede itong i-chismis kahit kanino sa nangyayari sa bata. The processes, the counseling, or unless yung tawag dito, kung nasa risk yung bata, na kinakailangan sabihin natin sa authority na kailangan tulungan ito dahil at risk yung bata. Transference. Ang transference, for example, this is just an example. If I had an experience of sexual abuse, and I'm very much engaged in this, and I'm very much interested into it, so I have to be very careful about that because I might be transferring my own experience to the child. So we have to be aware of our own consciousness. We have to be aware of our own experiences. We have to be aware where we are in terms of our experience of sexual abuse. All right. So we have to define boundaries. So it is inevitable that we might find ourselves in a very deep relationship, especially when we really want to help a child. We want to be of service to a child. Na hindi natin namamalaya, nagkakaroon na tayo ng attachment doon sa bata. Alright? But we really have to set our professional boundaries. We wanted to be of service to the child, but at the same time, I am here as a professional wanting to be of help. Okay? I want to be very, very compassionate, but my compassion for the child has its own limit. Alright? Because if we are not careful about this, baka yung hindi natin namamalayan yung proseso na ginagawa natin might be adding to the might be jeopardizing the injury na nangyari. And last but not least, to acknowledge your strengths and limitations. And the challenges in helping Filipino poor children is the lack of resources, the lack of holistic facilities, and lack of holistic programs, lack of studies. So, I'm only referring to my own experience. So, meron mga centers na kulang sa resources at hindi maganda yung mga facilities. It's not very inviting. It's not, hindi healing yung hindi nakakatulong sa pag-heal ng mga bata, yung environment mismo. And And again, there are a lot of studies that talk about the journey of children. Hindi lang ito doon sa parang the present abuse, pero ano yung mga nangyari doon sa mga bata? Ano yung mga success stories ng mga bata after the abuse? Kasi dito natin makikita kung gaano ka-effective yung programa na ginagawa. For example, na isang center, na isang institution, sa kanilang pagtulong sa mga bata na abuse sexually. So again, I would like to emphasize, when we're talking about sexual abuse, we needed to be prepared for this, because dealing with children is a very complicated matter. And dealing with the processes of sexual abuse in the recovery and healing of children, especially in the Philippine context, is quite challenging. So we have to be very, very prepared of the nuances, of the challenges, and the limitations of the context that we are in the Philippine context.